Thank you for joining us. You are a part of an elite group who recognizes that Black women's health should be at the forefront of the national conversation. We are mothers, daughters, activists, entrepreneurs, entertainers, corporate warriors, and more, who help boost the economy and often drive the national conversation. For 38 years, the Black Women's Health Imperative has strived to amplify our voices, help enact policy that protects us, research our issues, create programs that enhance our lives, and produce events like this one to ensure we keep the conversation going about the issues that matter to us most. So, let's get started with our program.
This is Black and Well TV, presented by the Black Women's Health Imperative. It's a special report. The election is over. I'll use that word loosely. Where do we go from here? I am honored to be your moderator tonight. My name is Erica Cobb, co-host of the daytime talk show Daily Blast Live. Tonight is a bipartisan discussion about the implications of the election results, or the results that are pending, on the health of Black women and how Black women and other people of color can effectively advocate for their needs no matter who is named the President of the United States going forward. Our panelists today include Deanna Hamilton, Executive Director of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. Joining her is Janelle King, panelist and co-founder of Speak Georgia and panelist of The Georgia Gang on Fox 5 Atlanta. Also joining is Tammy Boyd, Chief Policy Officer and Counsel for the Black Women's Health Imperative. Hey, ladies.
Good evening, Erica. How are you?
I am wonderful. How are you, Deanna?
It's been a long 2 days.
For us all. Well, yeah. I want to start with you because you have an extensive background in business and entrepreneurship. I've been reading your bio. You have worked with plenty of Fortune 1000 companies. You are a serial entrepreneur. And I'm really wondering, from your standpoint, I've heard some Black people say, I'm morally a Democrat, but economically a Republican. What do you say to these people who may be torn?
How are you torn? I am a definite product of that statement and could easily say that. But if you look at the lens of the country that we have been in for the last 4 years and you are Black, the humanity of it should be an issue for you. It cannot be just about economics. It's easy as an individual to be extremely selfish and say the economics of it matters, but it is bigger than that. It has to be about the humanity. And what we've seen is that Black people are under attack. So yes, morally I'm a Democrat, but economically I am a Republican, given my background. But what is more important to me is the humanity of my people and my culture. And so to me, there is no conflict. We must do what is in the best interest of the collective. One of the things we don't do in the African-American community, or I always say Black community, but there's the politically correct way of saying that. But in the Black community is we have to learn how to unify for the greater good. When we are looking at the lens of all common people and how they are impacted by policy, law, police brutality, criminal justice system, and all things around civil rights and oppression and suppression, we must be able to look at that collectively and from a lens of humanity. One of the greatest pains in this country, I always say, is the absence of empathy. And that is a very powerful statement. And what we have seen over the last 4 years, and the last 2 in particular, is that if we don't figure out how to raise our voices, create a narrative for ourselves, and take care of us as a collective body of people, and look at the humanity of that, our race and the Black race will indeed suffer. So to me, it's not a conflict. It is really not a conflict.
Deanna, I find you incredibly overqualified to answer these questions, because if anyone would really understand in terms of economics and policy, you would be at the top of that list. So I'm wondering if you could clear something up for me, because there is a lot of fodder on social media, in the media. And to be quite honest, I've been a part of it, because I believe that there may be some falsehoods to the notion that people are actually impacted financially the way that they believe they are. Can you clarify the issues in terms of people who may be in a certain tax bracket having to pay more as a fiscal conservative?
So that has always been the lens of the tax code in this country. Now, there are tax credits that may impact that. The tax code comes out every year, but for the most part, that has been the lens, no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, no matter who's president and who's not president. So the financial components of that is really around who's creating, from a party perspective, the best tax code that benefits X people. What we've seen historically in this country is that the 1 percentile really receive the best tax benefits. But that is just a matter of your income priority, and where you fall in the tax code. They're not rewriting the tax code every year. But what they may do is give potential tax credits and deductions that could potentially impact people in a certain tax bracket greater than others. But the reality is we all typically have the same tax benefit. It is just based on what you do in your career or from a business perspective, where you may be able to take greater advantage. And where you often see that is on the Republican side of the House. And that is the protection of the 1 percentile. And we've seen that with our own sitting president. And the benefit of taking advantage of that, what I always tell us is you just need to hire a better accountant. Sorry.
I got the same thing. Like maybe a business manager would be more appropriate than making it political. But I understand. And, you know, it's very personal to people. But I also think that there's a humanitarian issue at play as well. And when we're talking about Black lives and the preservation of people of color, I don't feel like that's a political issue. I feel like it's very much about being humanitarian. And that's the conversation that I'm interested in having. I do, before I let you go, I have to ask you this question as well, because a lot of people have brought up the idea of a two-party system is actually silencing the voices of those who do have at the forefront humanitarian and social issues, but also are protective of their economic, their economics and financials. Do you believe that if we had representation from a third major party, that would somehow merge these two ideologies together in order to create something that is both socially responsible and fiscally responsible?
No, I don't think a party will do that. I think adults learning how to play well in the sandbox will do that. And recognizing that you cannot look at anything in this country as globally diverse as we are from a singular lens. You must be able to look at the collective body of the country, and when you're making laws and policies and decisions, and be inclusive of all of those things. No additional party will add anything to the social impact conversation when that can be held in both the Republican and the Democratic Party. It's just really adults learning how to play well in the sandbox and doing what is for the greater good of the collective body and not one demographic or one individual.
Well, Deanna Hamilton, Executive Director of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, thank you for spending a little time with us, and we will see you at the end of the panel.
Thank you so much, Erica.
I appreciate your time. Next up, we have Janelle King, panelist and co-founder of Speak Georgia and panelist of the Georgia Gang on Fox 5 Atlanta. Janelle, how are you doing this evening?
I am great. I'm great. Happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. As we mentioned earlier, this is a bipartisan panel. Black folks are not the same. We are as diverse as Wakanda. And I do think that it's very important that we hear from all sides. So I want to start with, there have been cries from different groups about the Black vote being undervalued by both parties. How do you think that may have impacted this election or may impact the election in the coming days? And what are some actionable strategies that people of color can take to push an agenda with either party?
So great question. So first, I do think that the minority vote, particularly the Black vote, has been undermined by both parties. And the reason why I say that is because I feel like the Democratic Party has provided a lot of or utilized the data that comes from the Black community as it relates to the low income communities, as well as education and things of that nature. And I feel like that data has not translated into actual action coming from the Democratic side. On the Republican side, I think prior to President Trump, we became really relaxed in knowing that we can win without the minority vote, because you kind of get accustomed to it when 90+% goes to one side. You create strategies around what's already predictable outcomes. So now we have President Trump, who said, no, I don't think we should do that. There are people like myself, Jerron Smith, that's in the White House, and a number of other Black Republicans across the nation who has worked with this president very closely to create a plan, the strategy for the Black community. Whether that his plan happens in the next term, we don't know. We'll find out in a couple of days. But I do think that overall, this is a topic that has to happen. I will say that more Black voters came out in support of the Republican candidates during this election than we've seen in all history of Republican presidents. So I'm interested to see what that discussion is like once we find out what the final tally is.
You know, it's interesting how the conversation has evolved within the or people who have historically been Democrats, how the conversation has evolved within the Black community. But what I'm seeing is there's this weird juxtaposition, because there is the idea that with the Democratic Party, especially for Black people who find themselves low income or below poverty line, for the Democratic Party, there's this cry of accusation of more of the same. But then we have with Trump in the Republican Party, there is this sense that Black people and low income people have really been left behind, especially in the COVID response where Black communities were hit the hardest. So how do you manage those two thoughts, and can they coexist together?
So the way I see it is, and I know this is where me and my good friend Deanna, I love Deanna, by the way, isn't she amazing? Where we may differ a little bit. So for me, it's all about economics. The thing that the Black community needs more than anything else is money, is finances. We need finances to fix up our neighborhoods. It takes finances to bring in actual grocery stores so we can get rid of these food deserts. It takes finances in order to, increase the tax bracket so that we can have more funds more tax dollars in that area being funded towards school education. Everything takes money. We live in a capitalist society. I know there are a number of people who want to do away with the capitalistic process, but that's where it is. And that's where we are as Americans. You can't operate without finances. And so for me, it's all about economics, and the social issues are definitely something that we need to address. But ultimately, it's about economics. When it comes to the Democratic Party, like I said, I feel like there's a lot of communication, a lot of talking, but very little strategy. For Republicans, we come with strategy, and that's where it is. I personally have told the Black community prior to President Trump that, if you're not working in politics, it benefits you to play an independent role, because then at least both parties can court you. So it's not saying that you have to pick one side or the other. I've never encouraged anyone to be a Republican. I just provided them with what our platform is and what we believe in. And the platform that the Republican Party issues, in my opinion, is the most beneficial, especially to low income communities, because we want to provide school choice. Without school choice, you're in a situation where your school can't compete. If a mom is forced, and this is where I don't really understand, is that we force our parents to send their kids to failing schools when there's a school that's a couple of miles up the road that can be more beneficial for that student and provide an atmosphere where they can compete in this world. So I think that ultimately, when you look at the policies that we are presenting, they help the lower income communities way more than the Democratic policies.
Well, let's talk about one action that President Trump has indicated that he has a desire to do, and that's dismantle coverages provided under the Affordable Care Act. And he has shown support for, and both directly or indirectly, for policies that may potentially impact the rights of women everywhere. So how do you respond to Black women with concerns about the future of their health care under another Trump term?
Okay, well, so I'm going to put the Obama and the Affordable Care Act in one category, and then I'll put abortion rights and stuff in the other category, because I think that's where we're going with that piece, the women's health piece, so to speak. So with the Obamacare, it's not about dismantling health coverage. It's about creating a better form of healthcare. We all know that the Obamacare didn't work for a lot of people. It may have worked for a few, but it didn't work for a lot of people. I know individuals who were self-employed, who did not have dependents or children, and they weren't able to take advantage of Obamacare. And because there was a national mandate, which is what they were putting through in the Supreme Court, was to get rid of the mandate. The mandate, that means that if you don't have some form of coverage, then you're charged, I think it's like $700 on your taxes at the end of the year because of that. So that mandate doesn't help low income communities. So let's say you are that person who's working, who's self-employed and doesn't have any dependents and can't qualify for Obamacare. However, they find a way to, they have to have insurance. And now the insurance prices are much higher because this national mandate now created a supply and demand situation. So they're charging these high prices. So it's like, do I pay $1,000 to $2,000 a month for personal insurance, or do I take the $700 mandate fee that I have to eat because I don't have insurance? So all of that was where the problem was. So it was about tweaking the healthcare system, not getting rid of it. I know there's been a big discussion about pre-existing conditions. Well, if you go to whitehouse.gov, the executive order that the president put in place around healthcare says that we will make sure that we protect those who have pre-existing conditions. So that's something that is not talked about, but it's right there in black and white. As it relates to abortion, me personally, I am pro-life. I've always been pro-life. So I'm not saying that I am, that I feel like there's a problem with, looking at this system and looking at the abortion topic. But the issue I have is that ultimately there's an assumption that every Republican is pro-life. Every Republican isn't pro-life. I have friends who are pro-choice, so that are Republican. It kind of goes back to that social versus economic thing. So I think that the idea that because there's a Republican, in the Supreme Court, or that automatically means that they're going to attack your abortion rights is another talking point that I know comes out of the left. But then when it comes to talking about that, now the reason why I'm pro-life is because, especially in the Black community, we've had 47% of the Black population has been, I'd say killed, but has been taken out by abortion. So that's 47%. Imagine if we had all of our Black babies here, we wouldn't be the minority population. So I think that when you look at the subject, I want to look at it from a holistic perspective. Personally, I think there are other topics that we should talk about as it relates to women's health outside of abortion when it comes politically, like fertility. We put a lot of emphasis on how to get rid of a child. We don't put a lot of emphasis on how to bring children into this world and how much it costs moms who have infertility issues. So I think there should be a balanced discussion when it comes to that.
I heard this question raised a lot, especially when Kanye West was very vocal about the pro-life stance. And that was, is there a sense or a sentiment that we care more about a fetus than we do a child who is actually in this world? Because when we talk about healthcare and the disparities in the Black community, it would appear that there is more of a focus on the child before they're born than on caring for the child when they're born. How do you respond to that?
You know what? I have to agree, though. I do think that we put too much of emphasis on the fetus aspect of it and not the wraparound services that are necessary. I think there is that's where I do feel that as Republicans, and we've had these discussions within my circles, where we can do better is by talking about providing necessary support to moms. It's not like I totally understand, the feeling. I personally have never been pregnant. However, I do have friends who have, and I do have friends who've gotten pregnant at times when they weren't ready and they felt like they weren't ready. So I know the fear and I understand all of that. It's a very difficult decision. My husband's mother was 15 when she had him. He was 19 when he had his son. So I understand what happens. So I do think that there needs to be more of an emphasis on how do we provide support for these moms that find themselves in a situation where this is a tough decision to make, and especially when it's financial or, housing and things of that nature. But that's where, coming together and, working across the aisle is extremely important to do that. So I have to agree with him. I do think that's an issue that we need to address as we're moving forward.
Well, Janelle King, panelist and co-founder of Speak Georgia, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you later in the program.
Absolutely.
Up next is Tammy Boyd, Chief Policy Officer and Counsel for Black Women's Health Imperative. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, Erica.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I have so many questions, but I'm going to start with Black Women's Health Imperative recently released the 2020 version of its policy agenda with a focus on Black women's health. Now, give us the highlights from the agenda, and will the priorities set forth change depending upon who is in office?
So yes, Black Women's Health Imperative, we released, this is our second edition, and it's entitled The Black Women Vote, Our National Health Policy Agenda. And really it addresses some of the critical health policy issues that impact health and the well-being of Black women. It also supports partnerships and policymakers and other stakeholders, really to help achieve health equity. So in terms of the highlights, the agenda has 5 pillars. And the first pillar is around access to quality and affordable health care. And there you get into like your Medicare, your Medicaid, your reproductive justice issues. And then we have another pillar, which is the equitable responses to public health emergencies. And there we get into like climate change, COVID-19, also clean water issues as well. And then our third pillar is the sufficient diversity in clinical trials and healthcare delivery system. And as we know, clinical trials, it's as we're dealing with COVID-19, but it's so important to make sure that we have Black women included in clinical trials. And so we have a section that's dedicated to that, sufficient diversity in clinical trials. And then the fourth pillar is around funding and support for our HBCUs. HBCUs, as we know, is really sort of a bedrock for the Black community and for Black women. And then this year we added another pillar, which was around social justice, just given sort of the dynamics and the current state of play now. So we added the social justice piece, and we get into incarceration and police brutality, et cetera. And so I would say that, the agenda really provides a roadmap, and not only by which to evaluate candidates' positions on issues that disproportionately impact Black women, but, they also really hold elected officials accountable. And Black women can really have substantive discussions with their lawmakers and elected officials. In terms of your other part of your question is in terms of, does it matter which one is in office? The answer is it's sort of a complex, nuanced answer. But generally, no. Black women are Black women, and we experience health disparities. Particularly COVID-19, there's diabetes, some of the underlying causes where you will, there are more complicated implications for COVID-19, like diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular. I mean, those issues span across whether you're Democratic or Republican. But as Janelle sort of mentioned in the previous conversation, talked about abortion. I mean, obviously we do support a woman's right to choose an abortion, which, depending on who's in office, that, in terms of pushing that forward, that can change. So.
Black Women's Health Imperative has been at the forefront for Black women for over 30 years, and obviously very trusted resource for Black women. So what are you seeing in terms of the things that are top of mind for Black women for their thoughts on who the next president of the United States will be and what they need to know and address for our community?
Well, health disparities really for Black women persists across the spectrum. But, front of mind for Black women is, November 10th, Supreme Court will be hearing ACA. And as we mentioned earlier, really ACA had a lot of provisions in there, for access to critical preventive care, like mammograms, prenatal care, and birth control at no cost, et cetera. And so really looking at that, like how do we, we will hear the Supreme Court case in November, but we may not get a decision to June. But what the makeup of Congress, what the makeup of the president, who's in the presidency, all that comes into play in order to protect a lot of those, to protect ACA and some of the protections that are in there. In addition to ACA, there's also, we are very concerned about, access to affordable healthcare. We're looking also like at Medicaid expansion. And then specifically for Black women, we worked really hard and we collaborated with several groups, but our VP candidate, VP candidate Kamala Harris introduced legislation around uterine fibroids. And we know that uniquely impacts Black women. However, in Congress, there has been no research, increased dollars focused on research around uterine fibroids, or really anything to sort of advance that issue. And so we're hopeful there, that we have, hopefully a friend in the White House around the uterine fibroid issue. But breast cancer is also one, cervical cancer as well.
Really, when you explain it that way, we're really talking about representation and the lack thereof. And the idea of not having Black women in more clinical research gives us less data on how we are affected. And obviously, this has been an emotional election and year for everyone for a multitude of reasons, with data indicating that women have been drastically impacted personally and professionally. So how should we be coping during these times of uncertainty and heightened stimulation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so one of the things we have really been advocating and we'll be launching is a emotional wellness campaign. And really for Black women to also practice self-care. I mean, we know during this COVID pandemic, women have typically been the head of household. They've had to, homeschool their children online. They've also typically are the frontline workers who, when a lot of folks have been able to stay at home, Black women had to actually go to work. And then also they have really, at the same time, been really impacted from unemployment as well during this pandemic. So that's a big part of Black Women's Health Imperative, is really looking at Black women's health, emotional wellness, and how you take care of yourself during this very difficult time. And specifically, how do you do that? We've been advocating for, it could just be taking a walk. It could be, really just taking and unplugging, to really decompress. And so we've been just advocating different ways to do that. But we are going to be giving out wellness kits soon in December as part of our emotional wellness campaign.
Well, Tammy Boyd, Chief Policy Officer and Counsel for Black Women's Health Imperative, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to keep you here because we are going to have Deanna Hamilton and Janelle King joining us for a roundtable discussion. Welcome back, ladies. So I wanted to start with this point that Janelle made, because I have heard different talks from representatives of Black Women's Health Imperative talk about the benefits of Affordable Care Act. So is there anything about what Trump is putting out on the table that you feel would directly impact your mission?
So there is, well, the platinum plan. That's something that I do feel would directly impact my mission, because there's so much in it. The way I see it is, I know there's some people who feel like it's just talk and it's just a plan that's never going to come into fruition. But if we hold him accountable, and then if you look at the talk that he had previously, and then we saw results of that. So I know personally that there are people, like I said, like myself and other Black Republicans that will make sure it happens. So that's something definitely. When it comes to healthcare, for me, something that's really important with the Black community is food deserts. You can, if we won't need healthcare if we were healthier, meaning if we had access to produce and to healthy eating and exercising, and we encourage that. Personally, I'm more of a holistic girl, so I'm all about, making sure that you are being healthy in general. But so for me, I think providing access to food, to grocery stores, so we can end the food desert, as well as having access to your local doctors is important to me. But there's so many other issues that I feel will aid in just the health of women and the health of the Black community as a whole.
Deanna or Tammy, would you like to add to this discussion?
Yeah, so, the Georgia Legislative Caucus did their annual legislative conference at the top of October. And one of the things that we focus on is removing the barrier to affordable health care. And one of the topics in particular that came about was specifically around the disparities of healthcare in the Black community, largely in part to African American or Black women. And I hear Janelle and I get it, but what we must first do, and what I've learned from these doctors, is to educate people. Historically, what we have done is generationally lived as a means of survival, and have learned to cook in ways that is not necessarily a healthy way. And because we are not taking care of ourselves and don't understand from an educational perspective exactly how to do that, then we will never be able to do what Janelle said, understand the importance of what these food deserts look like, how we need to eat healthy. I just think that the plans that exist sound good. I always tell people we can make anything sound good, but I don't see anything that's tactical that tells us how we're going to do that. Now, that could be my overthinking mind as an accountant by trade. I need to see A, B, C, D to make it make sense. It sounds good, but we need to start pouring things into, that's where the social impact comes in. In the Black community, there's a social component that is necessary from an education perspective, from an oppressive and suppressive perspective around all things, banking, food, education. We could go on and on about that. So I think when I talk about humanity, we can't get to the economics until we address the mess. And that is, we have to be educated on what is required in order for us to truly build and sustain our lives, so we can participate in the economics of that. And unfortunately, in the Black community, we are behind the 8 ball.
Tammy, can you speak to what impact, if any, would the dismantling of the Affordable Care Act have on the Black women's health imperative?
Right. So ACA, previously pre-ACA, there were 20 million that were uninsured. And so really dismantling that is, particularly during a time where we're in a COVID pandemic, to even think about doing that, it's really, it's really sort of ridiculous to even think about dismantling ACA and folks losing their health insurance. And specifically, Janelle talked about the food insecurity, and also we talked about the social determinants of health. And I think all those also play into, in terms of, for COVID-19, the obesity issue, the diabetes. For example, for social determinants of health, how do you address diabetes, or how do you address cardiovascular issues if you're unable to access care and get to your doctor's appointment? Or if you're unable to have healthy food, how do you address the obesity issue? And so just, and then in terms of ACA and Medicaid expansion, other aspects of even abortion bans, like how, one of the areas that we're also concerned about is in the states. We're right now there are 7, Georgia's being one of the heartbeat bills, but how you address strategically in the different states some of the attacks on your right to choose. So the preventive services, the mammograms, and if you pull that away, all that plays into the health disparities of Black women. That's how we feel that it will impact Black women.
Well, you mentioned Georgia, and obviously Georgia has had a lot of attention. Everyone's looking at Georgia, but also you all are in Georgia, which has the largest state caucus of Black Democrats in the country. So how does this translate into policy at the state level?
Well, I will tell you, I am currently working on the legislative agenda for the January General Assembly. One of our priorities at the caucus is really looking at how we remove the barriers to affordable health care. And we are looking at varying ways. One of the things that has come up, one around the health disparities of Black women, the maternal health of Black women, is something that we're bringing to the forefront with one of our partners as well. I will be contacting Black Women's Health to talk about that because what I tell people is the caucus power is in developing policy to become law. We are not an advocacy group, but we do want to work with other agencies that are indeed advocacy groups that are doing this work to inform our legislators. So when we're developing an agenda or there is policy on the table from some of our partnering organizations, our legislators know before they go into session what is at stake and what they should be looking for. But we are currently doing a legislative agenda, and healthcare is on it for the state of Georgia. We know we will not do this Medicare battle. It's costing Georgia no money to extend Medicare, and our governor has just decided he's not, period. Even though we know it costs us $0. So there are a couple of things and agencies that we're working with around healthcare in particular. And we will continue to do that. And I am looking at probably about 6 policies that we will be bringing forth under this general session across multiple things. But healthcare disparities and African-American women is one of them.
Janelle, can you tell me some of the strengths, in your opinion, the strengths and weaknesses that you see in terms of crossing the aisle when it comes to healthcare or specifically for people of color?
I think the biggest thing is that I don't think either side really wants to give in sometimes, and I think it's really difficult to create a united response when you have both sides that are holding really tightly to their sides. I do know that healthcare is an important issue to Republicans. I mean, it's like I said, it gets overshadowed by so many other things, but it is important. And I know that our governor is not for Medicare for all, but he has recently mentioned an expansion for people that are in need of it. There's just a lot of low-income communities and low-income individuals who will be able to benefit. So that is coming down the road. But I will say that I do think that for me, when I talk to I have a lot of Democratic friends, believe it or not, I really do, and a lot of my Democratic friends agree with some of the things that I present as well. So sometimes I feel like if all of my friends, all of us was in there, it would be different, right? But then I do have some that are just not willing to just have these conversations across the aisle, and I know that that's where the discussions need to lie. I'm with Deanna wholeheartedly when it comes to the maternal mortality and all that discussion. I've talked to our senators about that, as well as I mentioned, talking more about fertility, infertility, health, and things like that nature is something I think we really need to target as well. I'm glad that we're focusing on these issues, especially when it comes to just our overall health, as women, because a lot of times, we are in stressful environments and, so high blood pressure, just a lot of things that happen. So So there's I personally have some discussions that I'm having with our senators, and we'll see what happens at the end of the election. And see if we have different senators, but currently the ones we have in place are open to having these discussions, and hopefully I can work with Deanna and we can talk about that.
We only have three. I can tell you now. I have the numbers. we only have 3 changes in Senate. So we only have 3. Yeah. So we're looking at pretty much the same Senate, minus 3, with 3 new.
There you go.
And as Janelle said, the struggle is always the compromise on both sides of the aisle. And that's one thing I don't think the collective body of people in the country truly understand. It is really a negotiation, because one side wants a little bit of something, another side wants a little bit of something. You have to give up something in order to receive something. And I think about the hate crime bill, when we all saw, and we sat in shock and awe when we heard they were cutting the education budget. Well, they had to give up some of the money in the education budget in order to get the hate crime bill passed. So it's a give and take, and you have to work those relationships on both sides of the aisle. We just hired a policy agency to assist us with that against our legislative agenda. A lot of major corporations and organizations in Georgia have lobbyists that work on their behalf to have these conversations. The caucus is no different. We recognize that we needed a policy organization that had relationships on both sides of the aisle, given that the caucus is primarily Democratic, in order to garner support around some of these policies that we will be putting on the table during the upcoming session in 2021. So as Janelle said, it is a game of negotiation. If you went to grad school, they probably had you read Getting to Yes. There's a reason that book is so necessary. And you could have never told me in a million years I'd be sitting here talking about politics as a business person, but here we are. And as John Lewis said, you're going to get in trouble, make it good trouble, necessary trouble.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk more. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So, I'm not actually in Georgia. I'm actually we're headquartered in Georgia, but I'm in DC. I have Georgia ties, went to school at Emory, actually worked for the late John Lewis. But that is so true. Particularly regardless of what happens with the presidential race, the Senate is still Republican on the federal level, and on the House side, Democrats are in control. And so in order to really push anything, regardless of what happens, you're going to have to figure out, how do we compromise? How do we work together? And, there's been great legislation that has been passed, really some monumental legislation. We passed even you talk about the Smithsonian National Museum of African History and Culture, and I was working for John Lewis. That was a bipartisan piece of legislation where you had to get, at the time it was Bush and Cheney, and the Senate was Republican, the House was Democratic. And so you do have to find ways and common ground ways. And that's one of the things we're really working to do also in Black Women's Health Imperative, is find those common ground issues. Diabetes impacts conservative Black women, and it also impacts Democratic Black women. And so for us, it's about more or less, how do we achieve policy change and implement things that will help, at the end of the day, decrease health disparities for Black women.
Mm-hmm. I really want to get people to understand fundamentally where the differences lie. And I think that sometimes when we're speaking politics, or even when we're at the ballot, we look at these questions and initiatives and amendments, and we're looking at things that a lot of people feel like go completely above their heads. So if you could each speak to the idea of, when comparing plans for Black Americans put forth by both President Trump and former Vice President Biden, where are some clear differences that you deem are important for those of us sitting here? Tell us the difference.
Okay, I'll go first. Right. So I think the clear difference is, I feel as though the Trump administration's plan is directly targeting, and I don't want to just say I feel, I know it is directly targeting Black issues that was presented to the president by Black people. They sat down together and created this. Matter of fact, the original plan And this is where the whole Ice Cube thing comes into play, because the original plan was in place, and then Ice Cube presented his plan, and then they tweaked it to kind of, you know, work in the stuff that he wanted. And that's how he came in place. So he wasn't endorsing the president. He was just making sure that the plan had parts of what he proposed. And I know that's something that happened. You know, a true story. I personally, I'm not going to mention who the entertainer is, but I was personally contacted to reach out to an entertainer, and I reached out to him and I talked to him and I said, you know, the administration wants to hear about some of your initiatives, and it won't be public. It's not going to be an endorsement. It won't be anything that comes out publicly. It's just to make sure that the plan is in place that actually benefits Black people. And he never showed up. So it's not that so we actually, and this is something that we proposed early on. I know a mutual friend of me and Deanna, Jerron Smith, has been right there on the front lines, making sure that this plan that is in place is directly benefiting Black people. My concerns when it comes to the Biden administration is that I don't think a lot of people have read through his entire platform, because I read through it. And some of the things that stood out to me that I think will be detrimental to the Black community is when he talks about creating denser populations. To me, that sounds like putting us back into the projects, because he said it would decrease your carbon footprint. But we've heard that before. We heard that before with LBJ, as it relates to putting us in these dense populations. And then when you hear people talk about Black on Black crime, or what I was told is really just crime due to proximity, well, putting us all together, that's creating closer proximity. So I think that's an issue for me. And then to top it off, you know, limiting our ability to purchase guns legally, that is a problem for me. Stating that we can no longer order my bullets online, that's a problem for me. And then even the buyback program, we need to be able to defend ourselves. We can't talk about police brutality, and we can't talk about all the ways that we're being attacked as Black people, and then we remove our ability to defend ourselves. So those are my issues.
So, Janelle, I do want to ask, because I wanted to compare the differences for Black Americans put forth by both President Trump and former Vice President Biden. And one of the things that you said, and this has been a very hot topic on social media in the beginning, was that Trump was trying to devise a plan for Black people that was created by Black people. But what a lot of the pushback is coming from is the idea that these particular Black people are entertainers and not necessarily rooted as advocates in the community, or have spent their lives or education to create advocacy for the community. So do you think that that's a problem, that it's the entertainers and not true community activists and advocates?
Well, it's a combination of both. So the entertainers is who they write about, but there's a number of people that's in there that are not entertainers, that are directly connected to the community, that is a part of that process. But then when we talk about these entertainers, I know the entertainer I'm particularly speaking of is directly in the community. As even with Ice Cube, I mean, he was directly in the community until he started working with the Trump administration, you know? So, I mean, there are a lot of people who have had their hands in the community. And I do feel like the benefit we have with talking with entertainers, that they do have a high level view of what's happening more closely than some of us that are directly in one particular area. So I think it takes a combination of all of it. And it was a combination of a bunch of people from various different backgrounds.
Thank you for addressing that. Deanna, did you want to?
You see my face.
You're having a visceral reaction. What would you like to say?
You know, one of the things I am not a proponent of is this celebrity culture, especially those that are in the 1 percentile, the very thing that we talk about. And while they may touch the community, they're not in the community. And I'm glad to hear that there were other people at the table. You need to talk to John Smith, who makes $15 an hour, who's trying to figure out how to put the puzzle together of his life. Or you need to talk to a Deanna Hamilton, who has been a corporate executive, entrepreneur, and has moved through the entire spectrum from the ghetto of Detroit until the woman she is today, and who has walked that spectrum to understand what those nuances have been throughout my 50 plus years. So when I hear them always say celebrity, and when I see celebrity, a celebrity can't tell me anything, because they are not walking the walk that I'm walking on a daily basis in that 99 percentile. And so if you're living in the 1 percentile, you can't really predict or speak on behalf of the 99 percentile because you haven't truly walked their journey to understand what their needs are. What the African American community or Black community does not have is an effective leader, someone that can speak the language for the people, that can set the agenda and set the tone of the conversation, that delivers value to all Black people, not just a subset of Black people. And that has been my struggle. Janelle is a dear friend. I have a lot of friends that are Republicans. And I know Jay Ron and the work he's doing. I've had a chance to sit in the Trump administration with the transportation, domestic affairs, education, to really talk about some of the value that we need in the Black community. What I never hear, and I haven't even heard it from the Biden administration, is what is the tactical plan? You can talk high level and it sounds good. Everybody always talks high level, but here's the reality. Even when you put that plan in place, you have to sell it in to the House of Representatives and you have to sell it into the Senate. And I don't care how good it sounds, if they can't come together with a tactical plan that is beneficial and sell it in where they can vote it on it, it becomes law, money gets allocated, like the CARES Act, the HEROES Act, Civil Rights Act, because that's what it turns into. And we don't know where we're going to place that in order to elevate the voice and the narrative of the Black community. We're just having a futile conversation.
I mean, sort of to piggyback off of Deanna, I mean, I think one of the things that, I hear you on, and I've heard that sort of argument that there's not a clear voice out there, effective voice of the Black community. I mean, that really, in essence, is, what we're trying to do. Even while we're, having this virtual conversation, is really to empower individuals to sort of, you don't have to necessarily look for that one leader, right? It can be you as an individual Black woman, go meet with your member of Congress, go meet with your state representative, and ask them and advocate for the things that impact, you. In terms of the Trump's Platinum Plan versus Biden's Lift Every Voice plan, for Biden's plan, just seems to have, it addresses the housing issues, gentrification, climate change, criminal justice. And COVID, even, we don't have to go far. We can say even how the Trump administration has sort of addressed COVID-19 versus how the Biden administration, has addressed that. But I think really just pushing, really empowering people to, you alone can really make a difference, and you can go and advocate for yourself or pull a group of your friends together to do that. So I think that's one of the ways, that we can sort of, if we feel as though there's not some people have said with the Trump Platinum Plan that, it offers promise around Juneteenth to make it a holiday. It's more symbolic than structural change. I think that getting in there and talking to people and really, bringing those points up and advocating is one way to do it. And you can just go direct. I don't think the Trump administration has really met with the Congressional Black Caucus or Black legislators. And for, I guess, to everyone's point is that you do have to meet with key people to understand what the issues are of the Black community. But I do think the responsibility is also on individuals, to also advocate for yourself, which is very important.
I agree.
Well, Tammy, I'll start with you. I'll ask all of you this question, but first, Tammy, what are your hopes for the final outcome of this election?
My hope is that, we whatever happens, that we are able to create an environment where we can somehow, for Black women, really advance our Black women's health agenda and really stay laser focused. Black women, I say it over and over. Particularly, Biden wins, Democrats win, whichever one wins, whichever president wins. Democrats definitely owe Black people. And I think that we should be very focused and know exactly what our agenda is and push and not get distracted by different things or other agendas. We have a Black women's health agenda, or we have a Black women's economic agenda. Push that and stay focused and hold them accountable to give you those things.
Janelle, same question.
For me personally, I am hoping for a Trump victory personally, but I agree with Tammy. I do think that whatever the outcome is, I'm hoping that we're able to work together. I'm not going to refer to Biden as 46. I will refer to him as President Biden if he was the winner. I think that ultimately, we do set the tone as women, as Black women. And I think that it's important that we show respect. So I'm hoping that there's a level of respect that comes regardless of the outcome. I also am hoping that, there is a plan. I really want to see the Black community come out better after the next 4 years, regardless of who the president is. So, only time will tell. I know that if President Trump wins, I know exactly what we're getting. I mean, I'm there. So that makes it a lot easier for me. But ultimately, I just want to make sure that we come out in a better position than we are today at the end of the next 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Deanna, same question.
Whatever the outcome is from the presidential election, what I want all people to understand is we need to get back to civility and a level of decency in this country, void of politics. We all are human beings that deserve respect, and we need to work cohesively and collaboratively for all people. But most importantly, I want our citizens to understand the political process. It was a reason there was a civics class, and you should have paid attention. It directly impacts everything that you do in your life, whether you believe that or not. That is the reality. And it doesn't matter if Trump is president or Biden is president. What is happening at the state and local level truly, truly impacts your life. So it is imperative that you understand the political process. You do meet with your advocacy groups, and if you can get in touch with and meet legislators, you do that so that you're able to really understand what you need and are able to help push the policy agenda when they are going and speaking on your behalf. Because the reality is they are speaking on our behalf. They are developing policy and laws that impact our lives. And we must be a part of that process. We need to learn to vote our interests and not our emotions. Our emotions have nothing to do with nothing. One of the things conservatives do extremely well is vote their interests. We need to learn how to do that. We need to learn the power of a unified voice, as well as we need to make sure that once we do put those candidates in office, we hold them accountable. And if they can't be accountable, you find somebody to replace them.
Well, that was a whole word. I want to thank all three of you queens. I really appreciate, and I was honored to moderate this panel discussion. I know that I learned so much, and it made me think of a lot of things, and I know our audience appreciates it too. So Deanna Hamilton, Executive Director of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, Janelle King, panelist and co-founder of Speak Georgia, and panelist for the Georgia Gang, Fox 5 Atlanta, and Tammy Boyd, Chief Policy Officer and Counselor for Black Women's Health Imperative. Thank you to all three of you for your time and expertise. This has been Black and Well TV, presented by the Black Women's Health Imperative. The special report, The Election is Over. Where do we go from here? This was a bipartisan discussion, and I hope that you got all of the nuance that you needed and deserved, because I know I did. So thank you again to the Black Women's Health Imperative for entrusting me with moderating tonight's event. Good night to you all.
Good night.